The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Naya Brooks stepped out onto the 20th floor. Her heels clicked against the marble as she followed the signs toward the conference room where her final interview was set to begin. She'd been here before, in a way, through Zoom calls, through email exchanges that buzzed with praise, through rehearsals in front of her bathroom mirror. But this was different. This was supposed to be the last step before the offer. Her palms were slick, despite the crisp folder she held, filled with a polished presentation she'd built over weeks. She'd stayed up past midnight rehearsing it, tweaking charts, fine-tuning language. Her mother had texted her that morning, "This is your moment. Show them who you are." Her best friend had sent a string of fire emojis and a voice note screaming, "They'd be crazy not to hire you." The company itself had sold her a dream. On their website, photos of smiling, diverse employees, high-fiving in modern glass offices. In interviews, managers nodding along, saying things like, "You think like a strategist." HR had even told her the final interview is just a formality. So why did it feel so cold the moment she walked through the glass doors? 3 men in suits and 1 woman in a sharp blazer sat around the table. Their smiles flickered when she entered, the kind that didn't quite reach their eyes. One of them checked his watch, another cleared his throat. The warmth she had felt on Zoom was gone, replaced with something harder to define. A sudden shift in the room's temperature, as if her presence had tilted the balance. "Miss Brooks," the lead manager said, his voice flat, "let's keep this brief." The words stung, sharp and dismissive. She forced a smile, settling into the chair across from them. She waited for an invitation to share her deck, the one she had built to showcase her vision for a campaign that could save the millions. But instead, the questions began, clipped and shallow. "What do you think clients expect when they meet a representative from our firm?" Naya opened her mouth, ready with statistics, case studies, insight. But halfway through her first sentence, one of them cut her off. "Interesting. But don't you think clients prefer someone who feels polished?" The word hung in the air. Polished. She heard what wasn't said, the subtle undertone that her crisp blazer, her professional diction, her perfect GPA weren't enough, that what they really wanted was a face that fit a mold she could never change. Her stomach dropped. She glanced at the deck in her folder, the hours of work she had poured into it. They hadn't asked for it. They didn't want it. The interview wasn't about skill anymore. It was about perception. When a security guard appeared mid-session to check her badge, she felt humiliation burn through her. The guard had barely looked at the others, but his gaze lingered on her as if daring her to prove she belonged. She swallowed hard, willing herself not to flinch. By the time the lead manager leaned back and said, "Well, we'll be in touch," Naya's chest felt hollow. The promise of opportunity, the glowing praise from earlier rounds, it had all evaporated the moment she walked into that room. As she left, passing the glass walls that reflected her own tense face back at her, the thought seared in her mind. What changed between the Zoom call and this room? She already knew the answer. Have you ever felt the room shift against you the moment you walked in? That unspoken bias, that silent wall that no amount of preparation could break? That's what Naya faced, and her story doesn't end here. Stay with us, because what happens next will expose more than just one unfair interview. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the truth behind what really happened.
Naya's story didn't begin in that conference room. It began in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, where the sound of sirens mixed with the clatter of her mother's keys after a long shift at the hospital. Her mother, Angela, had raised her and her younger brother largely on her own, working double shifts as a nurse to keep food on the table. From a young age, Naya was the kind of girl who carried a backpack that seemed bigger than she was. She lived in libraries, scribbling notes in the margins of used textbooks her mother had found at thrift shops. When other kids complained about extra credit assignments, Naya volunteered for them. She wasn't just smart, she was relentless. Scholarships were her golden ticket. Without them, college would have been impossible. By the time she was accepted into NYU on a merit-based scholarship, her mother cried in the kitchen, whispering, "Baby, you're gonna break the cycle." Those words stayed with her like a promise carved into stone. At NYU, Naya majored in marketing analytics, a field where numbers and creativity collided. She became known for her ability to translate data into stories that made sense to executives and clients alike. Professors nominated her for awards. Classmates leaned on her during projects. She wasn't just graduating, she was graduating with distinction. Her early career wasn't glamorous. She started as an intern, often the only black woman in the room, taking notes while others pitched ideas she had quietly suggested. She climbed the ladder through grit and results, increasing campaign ROI by 40% for one company, landing a national partnership for another. Her portfolio was filled with hard numbers and glowing testimonials. By the time she turned 27, Naya was more than ready for the role she now chased, a senior strategist position at a firm known for high-profile clients. It wasn't just another job. It was a chance to cement everything she had fought for since those nights spent studying under the flickering kitchen light. And the firm had seemed perfect. On their website, glossy photos showed employees of every background laughing in modern glass offices. Their careers page boasted about diversity, equity, and inclusion in bold letters. Their mission statement promised that every voice mattered. The first Zoom interview felt like validation. The panel leaned in, nodding, smiling. One manager told her, "Your portfolio is stronger than most we've seen all quarter." Another chimed in, "We need thinkers like you, people who can connect analytics with creativity." HR wrapped up the call with, "We'll be moving you forward. You're a perfect fit." The second round online only amplified her confidence. This time she presented a mock campaign strategy, walking them through slides filled with charts, graphs, and projections. The chat lit up with praise, excellent insight, impressive clarity. At the end, one of the panelists even said aloud, "Honestly, at this point, the final round is just a formality." Naya laughed nervously at the time, but later that night, she called her mother and told her, "I think this is it. I think I finally found my place." So she prepared. She built a new presentation, sharper, more detailed, tailored specifically for the company's flagship client. She practiced it until her voice was hoarse. She bought a new blazer, professional, understated, the kind of clothing that whispered competence. She believed she had covered every angle, every question, every doubt. And yet as she replayed the warmth of those online meetings, she had no way of knowing that the moment she walked through those glass doors, everything would change.
The week leading up to the final interview felt like a slow-building drum roll. Naya moved through her days with a mix of excitement and nerves, each morning marked by a fresh checklist scribbled in her notebook. Polish slides, rehearse key points, double-check client research. She wanted every detail to be airtight. Her boyfriend, Jordan, teased her for pacing their living room at midnight practicing her pitch to an invisible panel. "Babe, you're killing it," he said, leaning against the doorway. "If they don't hire you, it's their loss." Her mother's encouragement came in quieter ways. A fresh pot of coffee waiting when Naya stayed up too late. A handwritten note slipped under her bedroom door. "You're more than ready. Love, Mom." By the time Friday morning arrived, Naya's nerves had settled into something sharper, focus. She chose her outfit with care, a navy blazer paired with a crisp white blouse, professional but approachable. She tucked the presentation folder into her bag, triple-checking her USB backup. The company's HR coordinator sent a cheerful confirmation email at 8 a.m. We're looking forward to seeing you today. Final round interviews are our favorite." The tone was bubbly, confident. It almost made Naya laugh with relief. Maybe this really would be the victory she'd been working towards since her first internship. As she rode the subway downtown, she pictured the life that might follow. Her name on the firm's website, her strategies presented to clients, her mother finally relaxing a little, knowing her daughter had secured stability. She imagined herself not just working at the firm, but thriving, mentoring other young women who came after her. When she reached the building, a sleek tower of glass and steel, her heart skipped. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and polished floors, the kind of details she always associated with companies that had money to burn. She checked in at the desk, receiving a temporary badge. The receptionist smiled brightly, tapping the screen. "You're all set, Ms. Brooks. Good luck today." The encouragement felt genuine, and Naya carried it with her as she stepped into the elevator. She rode up with two other applicants, both men in dark suits, both pale, both looking at her briefly before shifting their eyes away. One held a leather portfolio, the other scrolled on his phone. Naya stood straighter, reminding herself that her numbers spoke louder than appearances. She had the data, the record, the results. This was supposed to be her moment. The email from her earlier interview still played in her mind like a refrain. "You're a perfect fit." She pressed her fingers against the folder in her bag, the slides she'd refined for nights on end. She'd built case studies, projected revenue models, even tailored messaging to one of the firm's most important accounts. This wasn't just an interview. It was her shot at finally breaking into the level of corporate America she'd dreamed about. And everything up until now told her she was walking into a celebration. As the elevator dinged and the doors opened onto the 20th floor, she drew in a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and reminded herself, "All I have to do is show them what I can do. That's all." But, as she would soon discover, it wasn't all.
The conference room was glass-walled and immaculate, with a polished table stretching the length of the space. Naya stepped inside, her blazer pressed, her smile steady, her presentation folder tucked carefully under her arm. She expected warmth, the kind she felt through screens in her earlier interviews. Instead, what she found was a wall of cool stares. 4 people sat waiting, 3 men in tailored suits and 1 woman with a tablet balanced neatly in front of her. Their expressions barely shifted as Naya introduced herself. The polite nods they gave were stiff, practiced, more formality than welcome. "Ms. Brooks," said the man at the head of the table, his voice clipped. "Let's keep this brief." The words were like ice water down her spine. Brief? HR had promised this final round was about hearing her ideas, about showing her fit for the company's biggest clients. She swallowed, forcing composure. They launched straight into questions, vague, shallow ones. "What do you think clients expect from a strategist?" one asked. Naya began her response with prepared statistics and examples, but she hadn't made it 3 sentences before another cut her off. "That's fine, but don't you think clients prefer someone polished?" The word lingered. Polished. Naya felt its weight, the coded edge behind it. Her crisp blazer, her articulate voice, her award-winning portfolio, none of it seemed to matter. And that single word, she heard what they really meant. Someone who looks different from you. She tried to redirect, to mention her mock campaign deck, the presentation she prepared. "I'd love to walk you through some strategies I've developed." But the woman with the tablet interrupted. "We're short on time." She blinked, stunned. Weeks of preparation, sleepless nights perfecting slides, and they weren't even interested in seeing it? Then in the middle of her answer to another question, the door opened. A security guard stepped inside. "Badge check," he said, glancing around the room. He looked briefly at the panel before focusing squarely on Naya. Her cheeks burned. She fished out her badge, handing it over with shaking fingers. The guard studied it for an unnecessary beat before nodding and leaving. None of the others had been asked. The panel continued as though nothing had happened, but Naya's composure cracked. Her voice stayed calm, but inside humiliation knotted with anger.
They hadn't come here to see her work. They had come to check a box, to keep up the appearance of fairness while the outcome had already been decided. After 30 minutes of hollow exchanges, the lead manager leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. "Well," he said with a faint smile that never touched his eyes, "we'll be in touch." And just like that, it was over. As she gathered her things, she caught her reflection in the glass wall. Her shoulders were square, her posture steady, but her eyes told the truth. She knew the verdict had been written the moment she walked through the door. The warmth of the Zoom interviews, the praise, the promise that she was a perfect fit, all of it had evaporated, exposed as smoke and mirrors. Walking out of that room, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, she didn't ask herself if she would be rejected. She asked herself something far heavier. Why did everything change the second they saw me in person? And deep down, she already knew the answer.
The rejection came faster than Naya expected. Just 2 hours after leaving the building, her phone buzzed with an email notification. "Thank you for your time today. Unfortunately, after careful consideration, we've decided not to move forward. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Her stomach dropped. 2 hours. She stared at the screen, rereading the message. It didn't even have her name in the subject line, just a generic candidate update. It felt less like a decision and more like a pre-written script they had been waiting to send. Her mind spiraled. Had she stumbled? Had her nerves shown? She opened her laptop, pulling up the notes from her earlier Zoom rounds. The panel had praised her insight. They had called her one of the strongest applicants they'd seen. HR had practically guaranteed the final interview was a formality. So what had changed? The only difference was that this time, she hadn't been a face in a square on a screen. She had been a black woman walking into their pristine conference room. Naya sank onto her couch, email still glowing on her screen. Her carefully prepared deck sat unopened in her bag, a cruel reminder of effort wasted. She pulled it out anyway, flipping through the slides, every chart, every data point sharpened to perfection. They never gave her the chance to show it. Jordan found her later, hunched on the sofa, eyes red. He read the email and shook his head. "They knew before you walked in, Naya. They were never going to give it to you." She bit her lip. "So what do I do? Just move on? Pretend it didn't happen?" He sat beside her. "That's what they want, for you to think it's your fault. But you know better. This wasn't about qualifications." Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from a friend who worked in the same industry. "Girl, I heard about your interview. Don't take it personal. That firm's got a rep for this." The word stung. It wasn't just her. This was a pattern. That night, Naya sat at her desk, staring at the rejection email one more time. Her mother knocked softly and stepped in, still in scrubs, exhaustion etched on her face. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Baby, I've been in rooms where people looked at me and decided before I even opened my mouth. I know that pain. But I also know one thing. You can't let them define you. If you give up, they win twice." Naya nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "But I'm so tired, Mom. I did everything right." Her mother squeezed her hand. Sometimes doing everything right isn't enough to break their bias. But speaking the truth, that might be. Later, lying awake in the dark, Naya replayed the interview in her head. The clipped tone, the interruptions, the word polished, the guard checking only her badge. Each detail replayed like evidence in a trial. Her heart pounded with a new realization. Maybe the job was gone, but the story wasn't over. The question was no longer, why did they reject me? The question was, what am I going to do about it? By Monday morning, Naya's disappointment had hardened into something sharper. She woke up with her rejection email still open on her phone, the blunt words staring at her like a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. She set the phone down and opened her laptop. If the firm thought she would just disappear quietly, they didn't know her well enough. She began with the basics. She pulled together every piece of evidence she had, the glowing feedback emails from her first 2 interviews, the chat transcript where a manager had typed excellent insight, the HR message that called her a perfect fit. She time-stamped them, lined them up in order, and next to them she placed the rejection email that had landed less than 2 hours after she walked out of their office. The contrast was undeniable. Then she opened LinkedIn. She scrolled through the company's senior staff until she found the hiring manager who had leaned back during her interview and asked if clients wanted someone polished. His latest post made her freeze. A reshared article about how client-facing professionals must project a certain look. The post was peppered with vague praise in the comments, but Naya felt the coded language leap off the screen. Certain look. She knew exactly what that meant. Later that afternoon, a message pinged in her inbox from someone she didn't know, a current employee at the firm. The note was short, anonymous. Don't take it personally. They had already decided on someone else before you came in. Final interviews are just for show. Her breath caught. It was confirmation of what she already suspected. The charade of an interview hadn't been about assessing her skills, it had been about checking a box. They needed to make it look fair, but the decision had been sealed long before she walked into that glass room. She printed the message, redacting the sender's name to protect them. She slid it into the growing folder of evidence, now marked in bold pen, Truth. That evening, she called Marcus, a mentor she trusted from her early career. His voice was firm after she explained everything. They think you'll swallow it and move on. But if you document this, if you push it through HR and the board, you'll make them answer for it. Naya, you can't let this stay in the dark. Naya's chest tightened. What if they blackball me in the industry? He didn't hesitate. What if your silence makes them do it to the next woman who walks through those doors? She knew he was right. That night, she sat at her dining room table, papers spread out like war plans. She drafted a formal complaint addressed to the company's HR director and copied the board's oversight committee. She attached her evidence, the emails, the rejection timeline, the anonymous message. Her letter was firm but clear. She wasn't just calling out bias, she was demanding transparency. Her hands shook as she typed the final line. I refuse to be silent while bias hides behind words like fit and polished. This isn't just about me, it's about every qualified candidate denied for reasons that should never matter. She hit send. Then, on impulse, she drafted something else. A post on her own LinkedIn. It wasn't an accusation, not yet, but it was a story. What happens when an interview changes the moment you walk into the room? She ended it with a question. How many others have been told they're a perfect fit until they show up in person? She hesitated before posting, finger hovering over the button. Her heart pounded. Once she put this into the world, there would be no going back. Then she thought of her mother's words. If you give up, they win twice. Naya clicked post. The ripple began almost immediately. Within an hour, Naya's LinkedIn post had dozens of reactions. By the next morning, it had hundreds. Likes, shares, comments from people she'd never met. Some shared their own experiences. Stories of interviews where the tone shifted once they walked in. Stories of being told they weren't a fit despite qualifications that outshined the competition. Others messaged her privately, thanking her for saying aloud what they had carried silently. but not everyone responded with support. A few voices chimed in with skepticism. Maybe you just didn't perform well. Fit is more than numbers. Naya expected that. Bias was never admitted easily. But for every dismissive comment, 10 more came to her defense. The post was no longer just her story. It was a mirror reflecting a wider truth. Meanwhile, her complaint to the company's HR department did not go unnoticed. She received a curt email from the HR director. "We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your concerns." The tone was polite, but tight, the kind of message written by someone who wanted to control a fire before it spread. Naya walked into the company's headquarters again a week later, this time not as a hopeful candidate, but as a challenger. In the HR director's office, she sat across from two people, the HR lead and the head of talent. They smiled stiffly, offering water she declined. "We reviewed your letter," the HR director began. "We understand you feel disappointed, but hiring decisions are complex. It's not only about skills, it's about culture fit, perception, client-facing readiness." The word stung again. Perception. Naya opened her folder, sliding across the printed emails. "This was the perception before you saw me in person. Strong candidate, perfect fit, excellent insight. Then, less than 2 hours after the final interview, I get a rejection email. That isn't a fair process. That's bias dressed up as business language." The head of talent leaned forward, voice measured. "I assure you, we take these matters seriously, but sometimes candidates don't project the polish clients expect." Her jaw tightened. "Polish? I wore the same blazer I've worn to client meetings for years. I've led campaigns worth millions. My work is the polish. The only thing that changed was you seeing me in person." The room still. For a moment, the practiced smiles faltered. Naya continued, her voice calm but unyielding. "I'm not here just for myself. I'm here because I refuse to let you keep hiding behind coded words while overlooking qualified candidates. You want to talk about culture? A culture that shuts out talent based on perception isn't one worth defending." They shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. The HR director cleared her throat. "We will review your claims internally." "Good, because I've already started a conversation outside your walls, and I can promise you, it's not going away." She stood, sliding her folder back into her bag. For the first time, she left that building not with the hollow ache of rejection, but with the fire of conviction. Outside, her phone buzzed again. Another LinkedIn notification. Another message from someone saying, "This happened to me too." What had begun as her private humiliation was now a public reckoning, and the company was no longer in control of the narrative.
By the end of the week, Naya's post wasn't just viral, it was a lever. Recruiters she'd never met asked for her resume. Former staff from the firm DM'd her with timelines and, most damning, internal phrases where polish clearly meant a certain look. She archived everything. She still wasn't naming names, but the pattern was visible to anyone willing to see. The firm tried to steer the narrative with a neat statement about its long-standing commitment to DEI. Comments under the post were brutal. "We've heard this before." Then the board's oversight committee emailed Naya directly. Their tone was nothing like HR's. They requested her cooperation in an independent review and permission to access recordings and notes from her rounds. She agreed, with one condition: a public-facing summary of findings, no burying. The review moved quickly. Naya met with outside counsel, walked them through her chronology, and handed over emails, chat transcripts, the anonymous message that said final rounds were for show. She kept her voice steady and the facts tighter than a closing argument. Meanwhile, her story kept rippling. A marketing trade outlet asked to run her op-ed, "When culture fit means we already decided." She argued for measurable scorecards, blinded early screens, time-locked justifications for rejections after positive panels, and interviewer calibration before anyone touched a candidate. The piece traveled. Leaders shared it with notes like, "Build this into Q3 hiring."
2 Tuesdays later, the audit dropped. First in Naya's inbox, then posted on the firm's site. The executive summary admitted inconsistent application of evaluation criteria, acknowledged that some final decisions were predetermined, and mandated immediate reforms, standardized rubrics, anonymized portfolio reviews in early rounds, and written rationales for any post-panel rejection, and mandatory bias training with real consequences for repeat offenders. Naya read it twice. It didn't feel like triumph so much as clarity. The truth had finally been spoken in the one dialect organizations respect: policy. That afternoon, a different firm reached out. Their CMO had commented under her op-ed, "We want strategists who think like this." The interview felt like fresh air. They probed her deck in detail, debated assumptions, and, most importantly, scored her answers against a rubric she could see. She closed her laptop lighter than she'd felt in weeks. 2 days later, they sent an offer. Strong salary, real scope, clear runway. She accepted. Angela cried the happy kind of tears. Jordan popped grocery store champagne and sprayed their tiny kitchen until they were both laughing. Even then, Naya didn't close the folder labeled Truth. A month into the new role, she led a workshop for HR leaders, from vibes to evidence, designing bias-resistant hiring. Calmly, she broke down anonymized take-homes, panel calibration, behavioral anchors for vague words like polish and presence, and audit trails that made "we just felt it" unusable. She wasn't there to gloat. She was there to hand people better tools. Afterward, a young woman hovered by the podium. "I almost quit after a final round like yours," she whispered. "Your post kept me in the game." The sentence settled warm in Naya's chest. This, more than any offer letter, felt like arrival. On her walk home, a glass tower threw back her reflection, blazer open, shoulders loose, a woman who refused to shrink to fit a room. The city roared around her. She smiled, not a victory grin, but the quiet curve of someone who told the truth and made it count. Weeks later, the original firm posted a quarterly hiring report that, for the first time, broke out pass-fail rates by stage and by department. It wasn't perfection, it was visibility. And visibility, Naya knew, is where accountability begins. She didn't need an apology anymore. She had something better: her work, her voice, and the path that didn't require permission. At her apartment door, her phone buzzed. Another message from a stranger. "Thank you for saying it out loud." Naya typed back, "Everyone deserves a fair shot." She slipped the phone into her pocket, turned the key, and stepped into a future she had helped to shape.
Naya's story doesn't end with an offer letter or a press-friendly audit. It ends with a different kind of victory, the kind measured in change that outlives a single candidate, a single meeting, a single room. What happened in that glass conference room wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the quiet operation of bias hiding beneath words like polish, fit, and client-ready. For years, those words have been a velvet rope, keeping out talent that didn't match an unspoken template. What made this time different is that Naya refused to shrink. She gathered receipts, told the truth plainly, and insisted that fair be something you can see, score, and verify. When the firm's policies moved from vibes to evidence, rubrics, anonymized screens, and written rationales, her private humiliation became public accountability. That's the power of one person naming what others have learned to endure in silence. But this is larger than hiring. It's about who gets to be seen as credible at a glance. It's about teaching organizations to replace hunches with standards, charisma with competencies, and comfort with criteria. It's about every door that has been cracked just enough to appear open while staying firmly latched. Naya didn't win because a company changed its mind about her. She won because she changed the rules about how minds are made up. Her new role is proof of her merit. The reforms are proof that truth can move institutions. And the messages from strangers, "Your post kept me in the game," are proof that courage multiplies. If you've ever felt the room tilt against you, remember Naya. Document, speak, demand a process that honors skill over stereotype. Talent isn't a look, it's a record. And when the record is made visible, fairness stops being a favor and starts being the baseline. If Naya's journey resonated with you, share this video with someone who needs the reminder that they're not alone. Tell us your story in the comments and subscribe to support more investigations that turn silence into change.